The following program is a production of West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Next, on Outlook, Upheaval, the story of the New River Gorge, Part 1, an examination of the history of the New River Gorge National River and the role of the National Park Service in preserving the New River Gorge's past while shaping its future.
We're driving down US 19, known by the locals as the 4-lane, and it was made possible by the construction of the New River Gorge Bridge in the mid-70s, and now carries about 30,000 cars a day. Most of those people have no idea the significance of the New River Gorge. It's truly one of America's national treasures.
Run on that New River train, run on that New River train, on the same old train that brought me here, gonna carry me back again.
My name is Sophie DeMeo. I'm a biological science technician for the National Park Service. Today we're out treating hemlocks at Grand View. A lot of hemlock trees have been dying. Hemlocks are threatened by an insect called the hemlock woolly adelgid, which has done really a lot of damage. And so we're treating them with a chemical, imidacloprid, to try and keep these hemlocks healthy in the park.
New River Gorge National River covers portions of 3 counties in southern West Virginia: Summers, Fayette, and Raleigh.
A lot of times people stop in here and don't even realize that they're in a National Park Service Visitor Center. A lot of people, even as close as Charleston, Huntington, have no idea that we have a national park right here in our own state.
The unique nature of the gorge, cut by the New River, makes for world-class rafting and draws roughly 1 million people each year to hike, bike, hunt, fish, swim, climb, camp, kayak, and ride horseback.
I have talked to people every day in the visitor center and say that they've been to places all over the country, and this is one of the most beautiful states that they've ever been in. There's so much to do and see, and they come back here every year.
Hello, I'm Governor Joe Manchin.
To promote tourism here in the summer of 2009, the governor of West Virginia invited reporters for a day of whitewater rafting along the New River Gorge. News media were also on hand as the governor's family prepared to try their hands on a new zip line along Mill Creek Canyon.
I brought my 10-year-old granddaughter, I brought a 12-year-old granddaughter and a 16-year-old grandson. It's for really all members of the family.
Ranger Billy Strasser says the mission of the National Park Service is to preserve and protect places like New River Gorge National River, set aside by the American people for future generations.
There are 4 national parks in West Virginia: Harpers Ferry National Historical Park in the northeast, and 3 national parks here in southern West Virginia: New River Gorge National River, Gauley River National Recreation Area, and Bluestone National Scenic River. New River Gorge itself was founded in 1978, and it protects about 70,000 acres of land, or about 56 miles of river that we see here. It's really an amazing place.
In his book, Far Appalachia, National Public Radio correspondent Noah Adams recalls the first time he went whitewater rafting along the New River Gorge.
I knew what was waiting for me. Big water, dependable big water. Class 4s, 5s, and plus. I was apprehensive about it. Didn't get much sleep the night before I went out for the first time. Worried about my car keys entirely too much. Didn't know what I was going to do with my car keys. Of course, you get there, and there's a bucket for your car keys. And it was just a wonderful thing. Just pure adrenaline. And at the end of the day, I felt more alive than I had felt in a long, long time.
Because not many people know about this place, don't know what a beautiful thing we have here. It's overlooked a lot.
Bill Parker is a swiftwater rescue ranger in the South District of New River Gorge National River. He says there are many simple but important ways in which visitors can help to preserve their national park's beauty.
We encourage people to carry out whatever they bring in. Don't rely on trash cans. If you bring your food and your lunch or your sodas or your beers into the park, we ask that you take them back out with you. I encourage people to pick up something that doesn't belong to them and carry it out as well.
Ranger Billy Strasser stresses, however, that the role of the National Park Service goes beyond patrolling the New River and preserving the ecosystem along the gorge. It includes preserving the stories of this place and its people, stories which help Americans understand their common heritage and remember who they are as a people and a nation.
Tell me the memories.
And we protect stories by interviewing the people who used to live here, looking into the archaeology and trying to find people's stories.
The story of the New River Gorge is one of ongoing upheaval, and despite its name, it's possibly the oldest river in North America. Geologists estimate that perhaps 300 million years ago, the continents ancestral to North America and Africa collided. Huge masses of rocks were pushed westward along the margin of North America and piled up to form the mountains known today as the Appalachians. The ancient Taze River, ancestor to the new, flowed northward from the headwaters in North Carolina off the once towering Appalachian peaks, cutting through the roots of old mountains with immense power and speed. The Taze flooded the slopes of the newly formed mountain range, giving birth to a new waterway.
The Gulf of Mexico was much further north than it is today. That's how much sedimentation has flowed off, eroded off the Appalachian Mountains, creating a vast basin, you might say, filled with the silts and sands of the former mountains.
Over millions of years and many different climate changes, the lowlands were covered with thousands of feet of sedimentary rock layers from the eroding mountain ranges, creating the Allegheny Plateau.
When the river is cutting through these layers, it's cutting through a little bit like a knife through the cake. But in the case of the New River, it's a little different. Yes, the river is cutting downwards, but in this case, the cake is rising also slowly and gently up for a great period of time. So the river is actually cutting at about the same rate that the Allegheny and Appalachian Plateau are lifting.
Such uplift has caused the river to run faster in its established winding paths, creating the powerful erosion that forms the New River Gorge.
Some of the rocks that are inside the New River Gorge are described as house-sized boulders. They're giant chunks of sandstone that have been undermined by softer layers and have come tumbling down. That means that the rocks that are underneath are eroding more quickly in sandstone falls at the base of the falls than the rocks on top.
Today, the New River, dropping as much as 1,500 feet along the way, continues to follow the course of the ancient Taze.
You're going downriver in a canoe or a boat.
For journalist Noah Adams, traveling on the river rather than over it brings the past sharply into focus.
You can cross the New River in West Virginia at 75 miles an hour. It just goes zoom down through the valley and up the other side, and you have no idea what's down there. And you don't even know, I'm speaking of myself now, that the water's moving from south to north. It's just a river. And back when our people came to this part of the world, the rivers were the interstate highways.
For many early explorers and settlers, the New River Gorge proved a formidable barrier, nearly impassable and deadly.
People that settled in the area in the 1700s came into a howling wilderness, as they used to say, looking for a better life and looking for opportunities that maybe were not available where they were from originally.
Generations later, the promise of a better life drove families, including historian Tim McKinney's, from the region's coal fields to Indiana and other thriving states. In time, McKinney returned to the land of his fathers, where he documented much of the region's military and industrial history. He says that while the first immigrants to call the New River Gorge home claimed the flatlands, families who followed were driven into the hills.
Land became so valuable, speculators bought up the land and forced people to go where the land was cheaper and where they could afford to buy or rent. And so as time went on, they moved up into the hills and not so much in the river valleys.
Come let us all with heart and voice applaud our faith's defender.
Noah Adams says it's through songs of Protestant King William's victory over Catholic King James in the 1690 Battle of the Boyne that Scots-Irish settlers here came to be known as hillbillies.
The Protestants would sing songs about King Billy, and the Scots-Irish who came to Appalachia would sing the same songs, and they were up in the hills, so people there started calling them hillbillies.
Ranger David Berry says early explorers here found a land of plenty.
Well, New River Gorge is interesting because the river flows north, and that enables species to migrate. The Catawba rhododendron, which is a species that's at its northern limit at New River Gorge, it's there because it has used that gorge as a pathway of migration to migrate further north. So animals can migrate up the gorge, seeds from plants. In one way, it opens up all these habitats, carving through the mountain and creating all this elevation, the terrain, lots of different habitats. But it's also created a pathway for migration of species.
At the start of the 18th century, mountain lions, elk, and buffalo, such as these found in captivity, were in abundance. Along with plants, rich forests, and the New River itself, the gorge provided immigrant subsistence farmers practically everything necessary to flourish here.
There was ginseng up in these woods.
In the summer of 2009, the National Park Service hosted a tour of one of many subsistence farms along the New River Gorge. Jean Lily Sovine and her sister Ruth grew up here. Jean remembers a valuable lesson her father taught them regarding responsibility and discipline.
One time he gave my sister and I some corn and pumpkin seeds to plant, and we got tired, so we just dug a hole in the ground and buried them and put a rock over it. And when they came out from under the rock, and my dad saw them and he caught us, you know.
Historian Tim McKinney says early settlers were defined by their sense of family and independent spirit.
They knew how to hunt and fish, they knew how to farm, they knew how to make tools of their trade. And so when people came in here and tried to change their way of life, or tried to show them a better way, we'll say, I think they were resistant to that because they couldn't see the need for it.
Nevertheless, these families traded goods and generally got along well with Native Americans passing through. Ranger David First says that by the arrival of immigrants from the British Isles and Europe, the region's native tribes had established villages elsewhere, returning here primarily to hunt.
Indians were here for thousands of years, and just to give you some perspective, they were here 5,000 or plus years before the Great Pyramids of Egypt were built. So they were here back when you could hunt mammoth and mastodon without a hunting license, you know.
Doug Wood, portraying an actual Cherokee warrior known as Man-Killer during a living history presentation at Hawks Nest State Park, serves as the lead interpreter for Trails Incorporated. He says native tribes tended to avoid the rugged terrain and swift waters of the New River Gorge.
But the regions just north and just south of the rim were considered very good hunting grounds, good places to establish hunting and nutting camps, cracking chestnuts and walnuts when they came in season, making all kinds of nut meal to provide their families food during the wintertime. Bears were common on the southern part of the gorge, and bear was a favorite meat to obtain in the wintertime.
However, as game and other natural resources became scarce, reports of raids by native peoples became common, including the kidnapping and celebrated escape of pioneer Mary Draper Ingles in 1755. British land companies had purchased much of the region's rich hunting grounds vital to Native American survival.
Where you first begin to see conflict between the Native Americans and the white man coming in here was when it became not just making a life, but making a dollar.
France's efforts to remove the British from the Ohio and Mississippi valleys heightened tensions, precipitating the French and Indian War between 1754 and 1763.
Most of the natives at the time who were in the Ohio Valley preferred trading with the English, and the French began pushing English traders out and bullying the native nations who were in the area who were trading with the English.
In military conflicts dating back to the French-Indian War and the American Revolution, mountaineers showed themselves ready and willing to defend their homes and freedoms.
I think in the Civil War, it would have been more about where your heart is. These guys behind me, the company we represent, came from Buffalo in Putnam County, which is Company A of the 36th Virginia. The interesting thing about that town is at the same time they gave us a company out of the 7th West Virginia, a federal unit, same area. So you really can't put your finger on why these guys fought for who they did. A lot of it could be just who happens to be in the area recruiting at the time they decide they want to go off and fight a war.
So-called Virginia miles, meandering through creeks and over rugged hills, slowed the advance of the War of the Great Rebellion.
Here you had small skirmishes of a few dozen to a few hundred men. You couldn't field 40,000 men in a forest. And so you would send out detachments in small groups and you would scout. Your opponent was doing the same thing, and so you would clash at some point in the wilderness, but it was on a very small scale. Nonetheless bloody. If you caught a bullet in one of these skirmishes, you were just as dead as the guy at Gettysburg.
The struggle over control of the region disrupted everyday life until the Confederacy surrendered in 1865.
And so you had a very difficult time with transportation, with providing for your family. You couldn't get to the grist mills, you couldn't get to the lumber mills, you couldn't get to the farrier. And so it was very difficult in ways that we don't imagine today because everything is so convenient and so instant in the 21st century.
I'm riding on that new river train, riding on that new river train. Oh, the same old train that brought me here's gonna carry me back again.
The advent of rail transportation along the New River Gorge provides a case study on the environmental impact of industry upon a place and time, and on the people drawn here. In the 1850s, before the War for Southern Independence, the Commonwealth of Virginia set out to establish a railway that would eventually extend from the Atlantic coast to the Ohio River, but failed at great expense to find an economical way to tunnel through the Allegheny Mountains.
They needed a big-time financier, railroad builder. That's where Collis P. Huntington came in. He had the know-how. He'd built railroads working in the West out there. He had the capital. He had the connections.
Historian Scott Reynolds Nelson says that Huntington, a charter member of the Central Pacific Railroad, proposed to do the seemingly impossible, using nitroglycerin, 10 times more powerful than gunpowder.
You pay off these bonds that were used to do the construction, but give me the railroad, and I promise you, in 5 years, you'll have a railroad that goes to the Ohio River.
I've been working on the railroad all the livelong day.
Extending the railway through West Virginia, begun in 1869, signaled a new beginning for the families of workers hired by the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad.
They were bringing in African-American workers who'd been freed from enslavement in the South after the Civil War, starting new lives for themselves and their family, working on this line. Irish immigrants coming, they're starting new lives in America, coming to build this line through here.
The legend of steel driver John Henry and his shaker, Little Bill, is said to draw much of its inspiration from the work performed here at the Great Bend Tunnel, near the southern end of New River Gorge National River. Musician and historian Jimmy Costa.
When John Henry was a little baby, sitting on his daddy's knee, well, he said, now boys, that Big Bend Tunnel on the C&O line, she's gonna be the death of me, Lord, Lord, she's gonna be the death of me.
They started this tunnel on both ends, and amazingly, they actually drilled a shaft in the middle of it, lowered men, mules, and workers down in the middle, and worked their way back out.
Hey mama, let me come on home.
as demonstrated by Talcott resident Bill Dillon during the town's annual John Henry Days. Tunnel workers were assigned the precise and dangerous task of drilling holes up to 14 feet deep for the placement of explosive charges.
The steel driver, that's what John Henry was, swung the 9-pound hammer. The shaker held the bit. The steel driver struck the bit. The shaker, every time they struck the bit, he would turn it, get the dust out of it. He would turn, shake the bit, turn it. They'd be singing and working.
Take this hammer, carry it to the captain. Take this hammer, carry it to the captain.
Singer and actress Doris Fields of Beckley says the songs that railroad workers sang to maintain rhythm between the motions of the steel driver and the shaker owe much to those of plantation slaves in the South.
While you're swinging this hammer, if you get out of rhythm, there might be somebody that'll come along and crack you on the back with a whip, or they might poke you with a gun. Or if you get too tired and you can't swing anymore and you fall down, they'll just drag you out of the line and put somebody else in your spot.
And a captain, he said to John Henry, I've got a contest for you. Now if you can be Lord, the old steam drill down, I'll lay $100 in your hand, Lord, Lord, lay $100 in your hand.
There comes your classic story, man versus machine. These people were proud of their work. They knew how it was important to themselves and their families. So they felt threatened by this. You know, this machine may take their job.
And John Henry, he said to his captain, a man ain't nothing but a man. And before I will let Lord that steam drill beat me down, I'll die with that hammer in my hand, Lord, Lord, die with that hammer in my hand.
And legend has it that thousands of people came out to see this contest. John Henry using a hammer in each hand. I've heard up to 20-pound hammer in each hand swinging it. When they had measured, John Henry and his shaker had drilled 2 holes farther than the 2 holes drilled by the steam drill.
When John Henry looked up to the heavenly sky, he fell over and was dead, Lord, Lord. John Henry fell over and was dead.
Each summer, on the banks of the Greenbrier, a New River tributary, the town of Talcott celebrates the life of the legendary hammerman said to have worked and died here long ago. Jimmy Luster's grandmother used to bake and sell pies to railroad workers at Pie Hollow in Talcott.
I really believe that John Henry did live here and did beat that steam drill, yet it broke his heart and he died from it.
John Henry ranks as one among hundreds who died digging tunnels for the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad.
People dying in this tunnel, John Henry, one of them, could well have died not from his exertion in that contest, but just like with everyday workers, from breathing the dust in here, the explosion, rock falls, that they were just put in the fill of the work, one day's work covered up and moved on.
So they carried John Henry to the portal, and they laid him down in the sand. And now every time the train goes rolling through, says yonder lies that steam driving man, yonder lies that steam driving man.
Historian Scott Reynolds Nelson believes the preservation of this tale of one man against the captains of industry owes much to the vehicle of his demise, the C&O.
It reaches like an octopus all throughout the South. You know, it extends further and further into the West, extends into the Southwest. The trackliners, the men who are singing this song, the John Henry song, as they're working, they're the ones who carry on the legend all over the South.
After years of digging, drilling, grading, blasting, and laying the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad through the rugged Appalachian Mountains by hand, crews from both ends of the state converged along the New River Gorge. Completion of the railway at Hawk's Nest, January 29, 1873, promised a brighter future, driving families here to sell property laden with coal, timber, and other valuable natural resources.
There might be a farmer here whose ancestors have been on this land for 100 years, and they would come in and say, we'll give you 25 cents an acre. Not knowing any better, the farmer sold, and so it really changed things when you saw the farmer become subordinate to the capitalist.
In 1871, the son of the first white settler in the area sold over 200 acres at the confluence of the New and Greenbrier rivers. The Chesapeake and Ohio purchased the land upon which to establish the town of Hinton as a hub for the railroad.
Now, ladies, if your husbands are railroad engineers.
Musician and historian Jimmy Costa says many young men gladly gave up farming to work for the C&O.
One old fellow told me one time, he said, boy, when the railroad came through, I found out quick and soon that a hoe didn't fit my hands anymore. That a hoe handle that wouldn't fit his hand anymore. And he got tired of, that subsistence style of living, making just barely enough money to pay their land taxes, nothing left over.
Coming on Outlook.
You'll be hearing the stories of the coal miners that work to get the coal out of this area, and up through the present day of people coming out to enjoy this place.
Upheaval, the story of the New River Gorge, Part 2.
Right on that New River train, right on that New River train, why the same old train that brought me here's gonna carry me back again. Right on that New River train, right on that New River train, why the same old train that brought me here's gonna carry me back again. Right on that New River train, right on that New River train, why the same old train that brought me here's gonna carry me back again.
This program has been a production of West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Support for Outlook is provided by the following. The National Science Foundation's West Virginia Experimental Program to stimulate competitive research, investing in West Virginia's future by building infrastructure for scientific research. On the web at wvresearch.org.